Hello, my name is Katie Groves, and this is part 28 in my series about deprogramming from trauma-based mind control. If you've not done so already, I ask that you please watch the first two parts of this series, linked in the description below, for disclaimers and safety measures you can take while watching these videos. In this video, I am going to be continuing from my last video, talking about how I take inner child parts into their systems through self-hypnosis, just enough so that they can see that they've been programmed and they're willing to relinquish their trauma to me so that they can be healed. This is, like I shared in my last video, something that I only do for typically older parts who will not become so re-traumatized by this that they recede even further into trauma and dissociation, but for parts that are resistant to other attempts to gain access to their trauma and who will likely only be able to accept that they've been programmed, release their trauma to me when they see it for themselves. When I decide to take this strategy, I will typically say to the child part that I'm working with, after all attempts have failed, I will say, hey, well, nothing I say is going to convince you. Why don't you take a look inside yourself and see for yourself what you've been through? And this is after I've explained programming, MK Ultra, DID to them, and they're still unwilling to see it. They're still unwilling to believe that this has happened to them, that I am a dissociative part, that any of this has happened. So I suggest that the child introspects, and before I actually show them how to do this, because they typically don't know, sometimes it happens spontaneously and they break down and they give me their trauma and it all happens really fast, but other times it doesn't. And so before, if I have a chance to, I actually explain. I tell them that I have put them in a lockdown where they can't split. And so when they look inward and become overwhelmed, which they likely will, they're not going to be able to fragment into dissociative parts. That they will instead switch states and talk to me from another part of themselves while they internally take a break from the whole situation and basically check out. That as soon as they become overwhelmed, they will switch out and another part of themselves will interact with me. That they will not have to endure any more than they are capable of enduring, but that I will not allow them to fragment. This is very important because I was exponentially fragmented, split into near infinite self-replicating dissociative parts who often cannot stop splitting once they start because of their programming. And just the action of splitting will activate the exponential programming systems that force them to split continuously. So all this part has to do is split one time to split into indefinite pieces. They may have already been split to that degree, and I have no desire for them to split further. So I'm not going to suggest anything to them or make it possible for them to split that way, or as in suggest anything to them that could force them to split that way. So through gaining access to their systems on a rudimentary level, by talking to some of their inner programmers who have allowed me to have the interaction with the child in the first place, I'm able to put them on a lockdown so they can't split. And I tell them this, if I can, before they introspect, so that they know what to expect. And while the conscious part will kind of look at me like I'm crazy because they won't know what I'm saying, right? These are the parts of them that are interacting with me verbally who don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about programming. They have parts inside who need to know this and need to hear this from me so that they're informed of what's going to happen. Parts inside of them who are more conscious. So once I've given them this information and I feel like I've safely educated them as much as I can about what to expect, I then say, if you'd like to look inside, I will show you, knowing what I've told you, how to do this. And when the part consents, if the part consents, I then count backwards from the age that I perceive them to be, to bring them inwards into themselves, and I usually couple this with other programming cues that I've learned to use from their parts that will trigger them into deeper parts of themselves. So I'll count backwards from the age of the parts that are talking to me. The predominant part, typically the part of them that holds the age that they present as, is the part that they're talking to me in. So in interacting with that part, I count backwards from that age. And it's coupled with the triggering signals will bring them into a state of hypnosis, deeper awareness. These parts often imagine it like they're traveling down a tube down the central axis of their body to the heart of themselves, in which they have core access to knowledge of their systems. When I count backwards very slowly. And each level that they go down to, each level they descend to, successively becomes more and more traumatic, more and more full of trauma programming signals. Often they will hear a cacophony of noise. They will see images of themselves being traumatized and hear dissociative parts yelling at them, screaming, throwing out abuse. Right? These are the parts that keep their programming in place. And I count backwards very slowly and allow them time to adjust each time they get to a successive level, so that they can then become overwhelmed and, if possible, switch back. Make the decision to switch out of the part that's being hypnotized and into the part that I talked about previously that can interact with me, give me more knowledge of their systems, usually kind of say, what the hell did you just do to us? And, like I said, go from there. Because the point is not to overwhelm or traumatize the child any further than is necessary for them to see that they have a problem, right? That the programming is happening, that it's a problem, and that it needs to be solved, and that they can't do it on their own. And sometimes they will not see that they can't do it on their own until they recognize that it's there and become deeply overwhelmed by it. So I usually give them about 30 seconds to a minute, and I track their expressions, their micro movements, when I observe them inside, and I look for that moment when I think they've broken, and then I will ask them if they need to switch back, because sometimes they're in such a deep trance that they can't actually trigger off to switch. They can't even articulate to their other parts. They're overwhelmed and say, hey, somebody help me. So I will try to prod them a little bit out of that state so that they will be able to communicate to their inner parts, hey, it's time for me to leave. I can't handle this. This is crazy. So in that case, when that happens, the child part that's being hypnotized will dissociate into some inner realm where they're not experiencing the trauma. And that other part will come out and I'll start interacting with them. And then when that part is willing and able to, they will switch that child back from the inner place of respite they were in into the conscious part that's no longer hypnotized, right? The child won't be taken back into the traumatic level that they were receded to inside, but they will be taken back into their externalized form like they were interacting with me before. But they will now be conscious of what they experienced, right? They will be guided, to remember what they experienced. Through posthypnotic suggestion, I ensure that the inner child part remembers what happened, and then I will have a dialogue with that child. And then the child typically will open up to me. Be very shocked, confused, possibly angry that I allowed them to see that stuff. But then they will typically give their trauma over to me because they do not want to deal with what's going on inside. And then, like I described in previous videos, I will use techniques to heal the trauma myself and make sure that that child integrates safely and is no longer experiencing the horrible pain that they were in. Okay, that's all I have for this video. Hope this was helpful to people. Thank you.